When people think and they hear the term research and trial, they think of like a laboratory setting,
Yes.
a sterile environment,
Yep.
that they're not going to receive care. And you actually are going to the doctor more. You get blood work done to make sure you're healthy enough or qualified enough. And when we've done some of these patient engagement activities, I think back to one event that we did just in January, where he talked about, I have saw the doctor more times than I ever had my entire life. I got my blood drawn, and they actually checked my diabetes. They checked this. And that was all right.
They check on you.
They called and checked on me. They reminded me to come to my appointments. And that robustness is naturally built into the trial, but it also is an opportunity just to change someone's whole view of healthcare as, quite frankly, what it should be.
Coming in, flex. I just wanna win, LABB, who we running with, 2233, I'm on 10 again,
Hey, and welcome to Coming in Hot, a discussion on health, opinions, and truths with the context of culture and community. Today, we're going to be talking about study what, study who, and what you're going to do. I'd like to take this time to introduce my guests. I'm going to pass the mic to you, LaShell.
Okay. Hello. Thank you for having me first and foremost. My name is LaShell Robinson. And I work for Takeda Pharmaceuticals, and I am the head of clinical trial diversity.
Hey, Coachy family. Ramona Burress. I work with LaShell. I am the head of patient engagement at Takeda.
Hey everyone, Matthew McCurdy. Co-founder of Black Health.
And I'm your host, Melody Noreen Blackwell. President and founder of Color of Crohn's and Chronic Illness. Today, our discussion is going to be around research. We hear this terminology a lot, but it's often used under the guise of clinical trials. That's the industry term, right?
Technical name, yes.
The technical name.
But I think a lot of us hear trials. We delete clinical, we hear the word trials, and we're like, trial, what is that? Is that the size of a product? Is it a subscription? What is a clinical trial? LaShell?
Okay. Well, I mean, so I try to use the term research, right? I guess the academic in me also doesn't like trial. It's a test. It's something that we're looking to study. We're looking to find out. At its basic core, we have a question: does this medicine work? And we want to know, does it work? And does it work in you? Does it work in me? Does it work differently? And essentially, that is what a trial or clinical research is. It's just trying to answer the basic question: does this medicine work? And who does it work for? And is it safe? Which is the most important part. Is it safe?
And to learn more about the science, because to your point, we know that medications work differently when we look at men and women and sometimes your ancestral lineage. So yeah, it's an opportunity for us to know more about the products that we're developing to treat diseases.
Yeah, I'd add that clinical research is also the way that we advance the science, right? How we improve drugs, how we improve outcomes for people. And so having that research allows us to improve and get to a better world where people are healthier.
Oftentimes, we had this discussion already about we don't go to the doctor.
Yeah.
Often, that is where most people find out about research opportunities. How do we put these opportunities in our community if people aren't going to the physician?
That's a good question. I mean, and I'll be honest, that's like my day-to-day work is figuring out how do we get research to our community, because if we're not going to the doctor, there's already a little bit of hesitation. How do we bring the research there? And so at its basic, you saw, during COVID, you saw us going into churches, pharmacy outreach, and really getting creative, because if you think about the pharmacist, like that's probably the most accessible person that people actually see. So that was one way we brought research to the community. And then, I'll be honest, Takeda's trying to change that. We're actually going into the community and kind of breaking that wall between pharma so they can ask us questions. I mean, that was one of the reasons why I joined a pharmaceutical company, is to be part of that discussion and kind of break down that silo of saying, ooh, scary pharma research.
Yeah.
No.
Normalize research,
Normalize
right?
it.
Because we want to let people know that research is common. Yes, we talk about medications, we talk about vaccines, but when you're in a focus group being asked whether you like Coke or Pepsi, and I'm like, no, I like Canada Dry.
Ginger ale.
That's right. That's research. So, it's around us. And so we want to kind of, there's a complicated history of research in our communities, right? So we need to acknowledge it, get in front of it, but to remind folks that this is part of the necessary of how we learn how, products come to market, whether it's a medication or a Canada Dry product.
So let me back that thing up one second.
Yeah.
We're going to back it up a little bit.
Back it up.
Let's talk about, Matthew, under this context of how we were already tried and researched on, but never qualified to advance from those trials.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of historical context on research. I think for Black people, when we hear about clinical trials and clinical research, we automatically think of the Tuskegee syphilis study. We think of Henrietta Lacks, places where we were either not told what the research study was actually going to be about, or unethically engaged with, and we weren't benefiting from the research that happened. And so the history of those events really have a huge impact on people's willingness to engage, but even just our attitudes and behaviors towards research in general. And it could not even be clinical research, right?
Right.
It could
Yes.
just be a survey.
A survey.
Right.
Yes.
And people were just going to be really hesitant. So I'm really interested to hear about some of your community engagement work and how that's been going.
So, I mean, first and foremost, you mentioned Tuskegee, so I just have to rep my school because I am a Tuskegee graduate.
I love that.
And, as going to that school, that really changed my whole focus of why I wanted to make sure we were included. I saw my younger sister get migraines, something so, you think of that as so simple and no medications. And the doctor looked at me and said, put her in a clinical research trial. And my first thought was like, oh my goodness, if I'm a doctor, I could be in the same situation. Right. But I'm on this campus where I know all of these things happen. I'm in this city, this town where I know all of these health inequities happened. And man, I bet if I look, we're not involved with that. So how do we change that? I mean, from the very, very beginning, one of those ways was just trying to elevate it amongst doctors that just don't do research, right? So we started with doing something called research naive, means they've never done research before, and starting them with very basic trials so that it's not very intense, and getting them used to that system, giving them that training. And that was one of the first ways. Then in patient engagement, actually looking at the imagery. When I looked at all the trial materials that we were using, they mostly didn't feature people of color. So think about it, automatically that turns you off.
Yeah, that's not for me.
That's not for me.
Yep.
And then when I looked at where we were advertising, I'm like, well, of course we're only getting mostly white men and white people. We're advertising in the New York Times. We're not advertising in Ebony and Essence and
Jet.
Right,
magazine.
Jet, sister, brother, sister, back in the day. We're not doing that. And so those were just the small ways when I very, very first started in patient recruitment that I tried to bring that with that. And then, of course, bringing more of the science, looking at the protocol, and really looking at the fact that the way the trial was designed almost eliminated us from the very beginning.
Right. So with your work, Ramona, as head of patient engagement, how does that work? What is the intersectionality between clinical research and your experience?
I think it's key, right? Because we want to have better representation of patients who are afflicted or diagnosed with a condition or disease be reflected in the science that allows us to put these drugs out there for the public. And so I sit within a Center for Health Equity and Patient Affairs, and we really partner with LaShell's team to elevate why this is important. Because if we look at many health conditions, whether it's hypertension or cancer, unfortunately, you see African Americans, Latinos, and other communities of colors like over-index in terms of prevalence, incidence. But then what gets even more disgusting is the morbidity and mortality. And so I like to remind, patients, communities, when we're talking about research, it's not just an option of last resort.
Right.
So many times you get these new emerging, life-saving therapeutics, that are simpler to take, by being a part of research and by, being a part of a study, you're not only representing yourself to get access to medicine, but we know more about people who are similar to you, right? So it's just having those honest conversations with folks about, this is why you're important, to make sure you're represented. This is how this ties into equity, and this is how you can impact your community and your own health.
I really love that you said that it's often shared that a study is the last resort, because that's couldn't be far further from the truth. And that is usually the context in which I have been told by our community members, well, they said there's no other option for me that I can look into a trial. And I said, it's not that there isn't no other option. It's just that you have an ability to now impact science. Yeah, here's another opportunity to access another level of care, because they don't even know and they're not informed that once you are admitted or accepted into this study, the quality of care is higher than standard care.
It's like boutique care.
Yes, it really is. And that was actually what I was going to mention is when people think and they hear the term research and trial, they think of like a laboratory setting, a sterile environment, that they're not going to receive care. And you actually are going to the doctor more. You get blood work done to make sure you're healthy enough or qualified enough. And when we've done some of these patient engagement activities, I think back to one event that we did just in January, where he talked about, I have saw the doctor more times than I ever had my entire life. I got my blood drawn, and they actually checked my diabetes. They checked this. And that was all right.
They check on you.
They called and checked on me. They reminded me to come to my appointments. And that robustness is naturally built into the trial, but it also is an opportunity just to change someone's whole view of healthcare. And, quite frankly, what it should be.
Yeah, I'm a better patient when I'm in a trial, and I'm not, so I'm a horrible patient right now.
I have Ramona, I wanted to ask you a question about, you mentioned that we can view clinical trials and clinical research not only as improving the individual's experience, but also thinking about the collective experience. Do you find that to be a key motivator when talking to people about how you can improve your community's health?
Yeah, we were just talking about that because there's one clear example that, what were we talking about?
Well, the study came out that like most people do join a clinical trial, like regardless of race or ethnicity, the number one thing was altruism. They felt they were contributing to something bigger. So it wasn't actually the last resort. It was, wow, I'm actually able to contribute to the community, to science, to innovate. And there actually was no difference across race and ethnicity. That was the part that I thought was very, very revealing, because me personally, I'm always hearing, well, people don't trust research. People don't trust research. I'm always hearing that from physicians. And finally, we have proof that says, no, you just might need to ask.
And right, because sometimes the trust thing is an issue. But for me too, in my patient journey, I was not asked if I wanted to be part of a clinical trial. And so this is me being a cancer patient. This is me being Ramona, who's a pharmacist with good insurance. My provider and I, we didn't have that love relationship that he empowered me with the decision to say yes or no to a clinical trial. And I found my own. I was up one night Googling, and that's how I found my first clinical trial, right? And so who knows how that Google in the middle of the night, has impacted, my longevity. But yeah, it's real. We gotta do better.
We definitely have to do better. I mean, even with the vaccine trials, I had to look for my own, right? I had to look for my own.
Yeah, we know that, Black people are really community driven. So I'm really interested in, Mel, your experience on, advocating for research opportunities and clinical trial participation amongst the population that you all serve, and how has that been?
We actually take the approach of education, honestly, sharing. If people don't have the information, they can't make an informed decision. And then this goes back to what you actually teach us on, and during community conversations, Matt, the informed consent and IRB and understanding, because as a community, when we get the lie, we're going to ride with the lie. We're going to ride with it.
They're going to give you a fake pill.
You're having sugar. They're not giving you. You're never going to get sugar pill. They're really trying to kill you in the trial. That's why they got you in that trial.
No lab rat.
Guinea pig, lab rat. We hear all of that, but it's all because there hasn't been someone in the family who's worked to really disrupt that thought process. That's why we're here. Let's disrupt it. Let's talk about it. Yes, there can be challenges, but choose your hard, because it's hard right now for you, and it can be hard for you on that side, but there's an opportunity for advancement on this other side.
It's a shared responsibility. I think too often when we have these conversations, we give blame to patients, we give blame to communities. But again, to your point, education is power. But I will tell you, remember how we learned how many physicians didn't know about research?
Yes.
How it goes from phase 1 to phase 2.
Or even, I'll give you one further. Didn't even know informed consent.
Nope.
Wow.
Didn't even know what informed consent was. And so to me, when I very first got into the trial diversity, I said, whoa, this is why this is a big problem before we
Yes.
can even get to patients.
Yeah.
The doctors are stopping them because they're scared. And even our interaction at a recent conference, we ran into physicians that were like, how do you feel comfortable participating in clinical research on the pharma side? And this was a physician asking me this.
And it was a 5-minute
Yes.
conversation to change their viewpoint.
Yes, exactly. And just sharing how we need people at all levels working on this to change the institutional part that is embedded in the way we design our trials, but we also need to educate physicians of color as well around the obligation that they have to help us.
I have seen it where the physician will actually project their fears on the patient.
Exactly.
So it's like, well, you shouldn't do this because, you finally got to this space. And while they're saying that the efficacy for this medication may get you into remission or get you into a better physical state, it could also have these side effects. And you have to be conscious of that. Yes, share that information. But this
Absolutely.
is a decision that needs to be made.
Empower the patient.
Yes.
Yes.
And I don't believe that that's always done. And if you have a doctor, I think doctors sometimes they get to this space of practicing and they're on like autopilot. So this is their regimen. This is how they do it. I don't want to lose my patient. I don't want to, and it's not even always, I don't want to lose my patient because I don't think that they're well. I don't want to lose my money. So that's real.
That's
Like
true.
we're here to be honest.
Yes.
Health
True.
opinions and
That's true.
truths, right?
Yeah.
Wait,
No, it is true.
yes, they don't want to lose the patient and because of their bottom line. And that's unfair. It's selfish. And patients don't always understand because they're trusting the white coat. So they don't know to go to a clinicaltrials.gov or to connect with an organization to try to navigate and figure this out. And they end up being unwell for much longer than they really have to be.
That's why it's a shared responsibility. That's why, those of us who work in pharma, we need organizations like COCHI. That's why we need to pay attention just as much as we do to say, hey, patients, come be a part of our studies, but also help our sites.
Yes.
Support them
Yes.
with the information so that they're communicating the right. Because sometimes
Yes.
they don't even know the science,
Yes.
to be honest with
Yes.
you.
They really
Yeah.
don't.
Sometimes we
Yes.
focus too much on the doctor, but let's talk to the nurse. Let's talk to the
Yes.
receptionist.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's a shared responsibility.
Yeah, all the people that are involved in the ecosystem, because
Yes.
at times it could be the secretary that's
Yes.
handing out the clinical research brochure.
Yes.
And that could be that make or break point,
Yes.
right? I mean, I've definitely seen it where that person is that conduit. So again, we have to do a better job of educating healthcare
Yes.
providers and giving them the tools to do it, because I
Yes.
will admit that oftentimes we get so trial focused.
Yes.
What is a trial? Enroll that we
Yes.
skip that step of saying,
Yes.
do you even need things just to tell your patients what a clinical research trial is?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's one of the goals that we've kind of fielded right now, is because we have to educate healthcare providers, and if we want them to be responsible for educating our patients.
Yeah, and something that I lead with when we have these conversations at HBCUs is the importance of the empowering the participant in the study, right? The study can't happen without you,
Absolutely.
right? And so you have the power to ask all of the questions, get all of the information,
Yes.
and then to leave if you feel like you're not getting
Yes.
that info.
Exactly.
Say
is
that
one
again.
thing.
You get to do
Right.
what?
You get to leave. You get peace out. Like, I don't need to be
Done,
there.
son.
Drop- mic drop.
Yeah, because that study really relies on your participation. And so really try and empower people to continue to, if something doesn't feel right, something feels wrong, or to ask that question. And that's all a part of the informed consent process.
And that's why I'm so thankful for like the All of Us platform,
Yep.
from 2 presidents or 3 presidents ago, whatever the other good one, because it laid the foundation for having a conversation of why, your participation in research matters. Now that was more like genomics and things like that, but it's all the same, right? And really empowering the community. And so then boom, we get hit with the pandemic, and there was all this fervor, to get
Yeah.
studies up and running. And, for the audience out there, it was not junk science. It was a lot of good science that was already
Yes.
going on that helped us
Accelerate.
the process for the pandemic. But we didn't get here like overnight with where we stand as a community and our reluctance to embrace research and or the medical system. So it's going to take effort. It's going to take a minute for us to kind of change the narrative and see the impact that we know we can get to.
Matthew, I'm going to defer to you on sharing. Like we've tossed around a couple of terms, one of them being informed consent, but I want you to explain what IRB is to the community so that they understand. You mentioned Henrietta Lacks, you mentioned Tuskegee. What has changed for us to I guess, be supportive of where science is just from that information?
Yeah, so as a response to the Tuskegee syphilis study and other sort of human rights violations, there was actually a nationwide and global effort to put together some values, some core sort of fundamentals and principles that drive research. At most, research must be beneficial, right? We can't do research just for research's sake. It has to push the science forward. It has to push human life forward. We have to mitigate some of the risk, right? So we can't have unnecessary risk for patients.
Right.
We have to ensure that people, are not being harmed just because you can, right? And then the IRB is sort of the institutional review board that ensures that person participating in that research study and that the researchers are applying those ethics in their study. And they, from the minute the research question is approached, the IRB is involved in that process, and they're constantly reviewing, looking for the human aspect and the participants aspect to ensure that they're not only being taken care of in the study, but receiving the ultimate benefit of that study. And I think that's something that's really important as well, is that we have to ensure that the communities that participate, if we're going to ask Black people to participate, that they also receive and derive benefit from that study as well. And so we'll be really interested to hear how you all are approaching sort of delivering on that inside, on the end route, the benefits back to that community, communicating results, and understanding how research really can be leveraged by community.
Yeah, from a patient perspective, it's really giving patients a seat at the table when we're designing the study. So I'm so glad you talked about IRB, because you come up with the initial question that I may want to solve for, but then you got to make the design, like how is this going to look and how long and what are the parameters. So allowing patients to be part of that process, where they actually help us, like, okay, is this a non-negotiable? Okay, is this something that we can do? Is this acceptable? That, I think, gets us closer to just having, again, that solid relationship with patients is moving forward, whether it gets to the point where we're looking at recruiting for trials or retaining patients in trials. But that's something from my, focus at work, is really inserting patients into that space.
And then too, another thing about the IRB I'd like to mention is the sponsor's not involved with it. It's an independent entity. It's supposed to be made up of community members. They can be from the academic institution, but it's really supposed to be a reflection of where that research is taking place outside of the sponsor. So like even us actually as a sponsor, we have to submit that protocol, and the IRB can say, this seems a little too risky. And I think that that's important because, again, it's independent, it's separate, it's like an oversight really born out of the Tuskegees that have happened, Guatemalan syphilis experiment, all these things. And then, as Ramona mentioned, one of the new requirements that FDA is looking at is requiring patients to provide input. I would love to say that we do that on a consistent basis. We're getting better, but it is something that does give us a little bit more of a view. How does this impact the patient at the end of the day? If we're going to ask them to be participants, is 10 visits too many? Do we need to provide transportation? And all of those things we can actually use to make our design better. Now, on the flip side, I will admit we need to do a better job of giving back the data. Oftentimes we close trials because they don't work. 90% of research doesn't go to market. And we do need to do a better job of communicating that back, because I can say that I'm in a clinical trial right now. It ended that it didn't get approved in the US, and I did receive very little communication. So I know what that feels like as a participant, and I will say we need to do a better job of doing that.
Yeah, I want to drill down on something that you mentioned around trial design, and thinking about the burden of a clinical trial. A lot of feedback that I hear is like, man, I got to go to 10 doctor's appointments. I don't have a car to get here, or, it's going to be over 2 years. I just don't have the time. How are you all thinking about the design process, and what sort of changes are you implementing to ensure that things are accessible to people if we want to increase participation?
I think back to, over a decade ago when I very first started, and transportation was like something, can we pay for them? Can we actually pay for the patient to travel to the trial? Can we actually pay for them to stay in a hotel? And it was a smaller pharma company, but they took a very big stance on, it was an Alzheimer's trial, of actually making sure that both the caregiver and the patient were taken care of. And I look back to that point, and now pretty much every trial has transportation. It's really just a matter of, is the site going to pay it? Are we reimbursing, et cetera? I personally am trying to move less towards reimbursement and just, providing the service as the patient needs it. But that's changed dramatically.
Yeah.
For sure. And then also looking at, is it a requirement? You're getting more pushback around, okay, is this just an endpoint that you would just like to see because you're curious and you already have the patient there? Is it required? Because what we're hearing from patients is 10 visits is a little too much, but 8 is okay.
Yep.
And also the next point is also looking at standard of care. Like, does it actually line up with what they're already doing? So if the patient is already going to do this at the 6-month time point, why can't we include that in the clinical trial? It lowers the cost for everything. It makes it easier. It seems like it's part of the process of what you're naturally going to do. So those are some of the changes that I've seen over the last decade or so as we've moved to more, I would say, patient-centric research.
Yeah, and I think that's important, right? Because we understood that transportation is a barrier. We hear about childcare, but I think to LaShell's point, to really involve the patient early in that design, because I may find out that, I want Canada Dry as part of my study trial because I'm getting nauseous, right? And the saltines aren't working. So, but it's important for us to keep asking because, when you get one answer, that doesn't mean that's it for everything.
Right.
There's always something
for
new to
everyone.
learn. Yes.
And even with the disease, it changes. Like that tolerability changes.
Yes.
Cancer, completely different than, a different trial.
Yeah.
These are the spaces of accountability that people often go uninformed about. They don't know about IRB. They don't know about trial design. They don't know that other patients have participated to help decipher or determine what might actually be beneficial to the patient. One of the challenges that I hear people share when it comes to just clinical research is that their own costs, because sometimes they're getting these bills from their insurance company. One person I know in particular, they received a $2,000 bill for all of these appointments and blood work and tests. And they were like, wait a minute, but the site that was set up to manage this was not being responsive. So whose burden is that?
Yeah. We're having those conversations now, but it takes the voice of a patient and be like, look, this ain't right, so that it gets elevated, so that we are accounting for that when we're doing budgeting, when we're looking at, okay, what payers are not, covering XYZ services, because I know for Medicaid patients it's a big deal, and I know there's legislation right now to kind of solve for that. But it took these patients elevating that this was a problem.
It was a 10-year gap. Medicare covered it, but Medicaid didn't, and only with the pandemic did it get elevated. So that, again, the voice of the patient is important. And I will even say too, on our end, sometimes we don't even hear it from sites until it's too late. So part of, what we're trying to do too with just being more involved in those site discussions and letting the sites know, hey, you need to ask us. One of the clearest examples that I can think of is we had an investigator that was doing mini mental scores for Alzheimer's disease. And he said, this is great, but most of my patients have had this before 6 months and now their insurance won't cover it. So what are we going to do here? But him elevating that, all I had to do is go and ask.
Right.
And all of a sudden we were able to make that change to the site budget again. But these are the questions that we have to naturally start asking and need to also close the loop with sites when they're hearing this over and over so we can make sure that those patients are included.
I'm just I can only imagine the level of pistivity.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You're being altruistic. I'm coming here. I'm going to save everybody with IBD who's Black.
And here's your bill.
And here's your bill.
Right.
And I'm an hourly employee. And I had to take off time to participate in this. And I still have to get home, and I don't even want to deal with it anymore. These are the challenges that we face in this community, trying to participate in doing something better for ourselves, but better for others.
Right.
And we've covered the study what, we've covered the study who, but now it's what you going to do with my information. So as you all are in these spaces, Matthew, we said informed consent. Can you explain informed consent?
Yeah, so informed consent is really on the behalf of the study design, the study leader, they have to give you enough information for you to be willing to participate. Right. And you have, before you decide to enroll, you have the opportunity to ask a ton of questions. What's going to happen? What's going to happen to my data? What's going to happen during the study? And then throughout the process, you can continue to ask questions. And so that consent isn't a one-time consent. And I
Yes.
think that's what a lot of people get mistaken, that once I give my consent, I'm just sort of here. You're able to continue, and that's why it's informed. As the study continues, you continue to ask questions, continue to be informed about what's happening in the study, what's happening with my data. And then again, at the end of the study, what happened, right? Is that data going to be available for us? And like I said before, if you feel like that study isn't really getting at what you need, you have the ability to leave. And if they're not being responsive, you can actually go to the IRB and let them know that things aren't looking the way that you expect them to.
Yeah.
So, you can say something.
No, yeah. If people are interested in research, right? Because sometimes you look at that informed consent and it looks like you're signing up for a car loan.
Right.
And I know every time I sign up, to go buy a car, I got a boo-boo because I get so nervous. But so if it's overwhelming, you have every right to ask that person at your doctor's office or at the site to walk you through, like, what is this legalese?
Yes.
Right.
Break it down
Yes.
for me. And to
Yes.
your point, while you're in the study, you can always revisit it and say, hey, let me know again, what did paragraph 2 say?
Yes.
So that's important.
And you
Page
can ask for it
27.
to be written in a way that you can understand,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
So
Mhm.
as
Yeah,
you
exactly.
go to those documents, like, hey, I don't really understand this. Can you provide something that's legible at my reading level? And they have to be responsive to that if they want to include you in that study.
Right, short form.
It-
And
I'm sorry.
I was going to say to your point about the informed consent, we've actually gotten more requests from sites to try to put like a short form together.
Yes.
What are those key things? Do you have something that's an infographic? I always am a big advocate of e-consent because you can add videos and
Yes.
it can be multilingual, it can be
Right.
interactive. And so those are again, you talk about changes in research. That's one of those things that's changing, is actually
What's
incorporating.
e-consent? What's that, electronic?
I'm sorry, electronic consent. Electronic consent. Like you can sign up on your phone. You can take it home. You can discuss it with your family around the
Right.
dinner table. You don't have to do it right when you're there. You can think about it.
So if you're under the care of a primary care physician, you're under the care of your doctor, and your doctor's like, I don't want you to do the trial. I don't want you to participate. And I'm saying trial just because that is industry language, but we don't often say trial at coaching. We say research opportunity or research because trial is not a healthy word for Black people.
Right.
And we talk about that. But when we go, so back to my question, if your doctor doesn't want you to participate or they're saying, I don't believe in clinical research, what should someone do?
Well, your doctor can't prevent you from being, if you really would like to be part of a research trial, they cannot prevent you. But I mean, obviously, I think any person would tell you to make a decision with your healthcare provider's input.
But Ramona said that
But-
her doctor is not how she found
Right,
was up
right.
research.
But
Yeah.
most people, again, even myself, I researched it. I had to go to a different website.
But you're
I
also in the
knew
industry,
I also
right.
knew how to find it, right? So there's that gap again around we can't just rely on healthcare providers. We have to make sure the research opportunities are available everywhere. It's the library, working with the consulate, working with the healthcare providers, health department, all of those different avenues, because we can't oftentimes rely on our healthcare providers to do it for us.
But that's why, organizations and platforms such as Coachy is key, right? Because sometimes, we do have barriers, whether it's with your physician, whether it's, insurance, but having a space where you have those who are like you talking about, hey, did you hear about this? Like that information exchange, that is key.
Yes.
It
The
really
fact that you
is.
allow this platform for others to learn more about their conditions, I think that is so pivotal. And the way that you interface with the community, it's not just, take this brochure.
Yes.
Exactly.
It's not just this format here, right?
Right.
It's like that multi-layered
It's a discussion,
And that's important.
conversation, keeps going.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. I was going to emphasize that as well. I think creating opportunities for folks to collaborate, to share knowledge, because trials often happen more than once, right? They have a larger patient size because they want to test again. So if there are people who are previously in that trial say, hey, what was it like? How did that go? I think creating that level of communication through an organization like Coachy is really strong and really important.
What are the other ways for financial support in a trial? Like, I've seen it where they're now really taking into consideration the financial burden that it might put on the patient. Historically, that wasn't really considered. It was discussed and it was like, we just can't pay for that. But now I think science industry is recognizing that this person is taking away time and their time is valuable. How do you see that shifting?
There's definitely a shift. When we would talk to the IRB and even legal, there was a very large concern about inducement.
Yes.
right? If we
What's
pay them,
inducement?
paying for pay to play, basically. We're going to pay you for participation. And it's really putting a pause and having them kind of put themselves in that patient's shoes. So I always kind of start with a question. Okay, well, what if this person doesn't have insurance?
Right.
And for some, they've never even thought about the fact that a patient could not have insurance, which blew my mind. And they said, well, what do you mean they don't have insurance? I said, they don't have insurance. So in this case, you're talking about standard of care, and it just doesn't exist because they have no insurance. So that is the patient I'm speaking about. How do we fill that gap? Well, Medicaid and Medicare. Okay, well, what if they don't qualify for Medicaid or Medicare? There are people that fall into that space. They do. I said those are the people that actually probably could benefit from our trials. And so again, that lived experience that maybe some people haven't had is something that we're elevating and having that discussion and getting them to think differently as we move forward with that. And then two, making sure the IRB is along, because at the end of the day, the IRB actually has to approve those payments, and we have to be forthcoming with asking. So what is your threshold for childcare? What is your threshold before you think it's inducement? And let's not forget phase 1 trials. Phase 1 trials are the most diverse. Phase 1s are the very, very first time it's done in humans, just to kind of bring it back a little bit. So it's the first time it's done in humans, first time it comes from, the laboratory to humans. And we actually do pay patients. We actually pay patients. Those sites are located in more urban areas. They usually do a great job with advertising. They're usually on the radio. I mean, these are when you hear like career clinical trial participants, that's that phase 1 trial. So if we can pay them in that space, why does it all of a sudden become wrong?
Right. Now, when I'm going to go back to trial design, and you brought it back when you said phase 1 means this and these different phases. When you think of trial design, someone happens to go to clinicaltrials.gov who doesn't have insurance, and they're able to navigate this crazy website that's full of information.
Bravo.
Yes. And they've signed up, and now they're kind of working through the process, and they're looking for these criterias. What are those criteria? What are they called, and why do they have them?
So the big term, inclusion, exclusion criterion, exclusionary criterion, protocol criterion. Basically it is the checklist that says whether or not you can get in. So a lot of them are really to try to have, I guess, the best patient as possible, at least risk. But I will admit that a lot of times some of the fluff in the exclusion can be a little restrictive.
Yes.
And there's an acknowledgement in industry around that. And oncology in particular cancer in particular has a very, very big initiative to take out some of those things that really don't matter at the end of the day, and let the science kind of catch up with who the patients are. So that's what that big long list is. It basically tells you who can participate and who can't. And physicians use that to qualify the patient.
I think it's interesting because I always hear the inclusion criteria, and I said, no, that's a disqualification model.
Right, it is. It is disqualification.
And that's why we have to really put effort into making sure we get input and take an honest look at those criterion. Because if I'm out there saying, hey, community, come in and be a part of this study, and then it's like, oh, well, now that we got you here, you don't meet the criteria.
Right.
Oh, you're over 55.
Right. Ooh, your kidney function is weird.
You weigh too much.
You've been on one too many biologics.
That too. Yeah. Exactly.
Ooh, diabetes under control. Ain't under control.
Right. Yeah. Uncontrolled diabetes. And furthermore, at the physician's discretion. So what does that mean?
Right.
So, I mean, a lot of efforts to take out subjective things, taking out like language exclusion. I'm even, it is horrible to admit 26% of protocols have language restrictions, meaning like you have to speak English, right? Wow. So you can already imagine the implication of that.
And we're trying to make these diverse.
Right. And so, and to be honest, it's usually because somebody forgot to translate the ICF, and that's how they've rectified it, if we're honest about
What's
it.
What's the ICF?
The informed consent. Informed consent. Thank you. Keeping me honest. Yes. Yeah. They forgot to translate that important document that you have to sign up. So again, when we're looking at how do we make research more for the people or people-friendly, community-friendly, more community-centric, it is taking a mirror and saying, does this actually reflect the people we're trying to ask to participate?
Yeah, that's really important. And we've talked a lot about holding physicians accountable, holding study sites accountable, but also in ensuring that the community is present when these things are designed. Before we wrap, we like to do a session called Drop a Deuce, where we get your 2 favorite key takeaways from the discussion today. So I'll start here next to me with Ramona, and give me your two key takeaways.
Yeah, if I can give anything for the audience, it's really to use your voice. Your voice is powerful. So whether it's for your own health journey or for that of a loved one or just for your community, use your voice. We saw how much impact that had in 2020. Sometimes we call it social unrest, but I think that's key. We really need to, if something's wrong, if something doesn't feel right, elevate it. If that person isn't listening, take it to the next step. Because it's amazing how, especially our community, we do that. Like if I go to Nordstrom's and I'm getting back here, or if I'm going to a grocery store and there's no Canada Dry, I'm pissed off, right? I'm complaining. But let's take that same type of energy and really pull it into this health space. Sometimes we talk about the levels of, the doctor's more important or he's smarter. No, you have every right to have your voice heard.
Yes.
So that's my takeaway.
Well, you didn't really leave me more to drop a deuce.
Sorry.
But let me finish.
Not enough deuces left.
I would say too, just, don't be afraid to I don't want to say challenge your healthcare provider, but continue to ask questions, because again, there's no possibility for them to know everything around clinical trials, around your healthcare. Be an advocate for yourself, always ask questions. And furthermore, it's not a scary thing. Research can also be exciting. It's the way that medications are made. It's the only way that medications are made. So when you think about the goal of it is really to make sure that we're creating a healthier community that maybe can help take away some of that nervousness.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much. I think that this has been an amazingly informative conversation on clinical research. We'll be talking more about this subject, and maybe we'll get our guests back. Until then, thank you for tuning in to Coming In Hot.
Running through it with the young influence, adolescent presence, also coming to it. I've been giving yeses when I shouldn't do it. I complete objective, but the moves elusive, and I'm barely moving, but I'm still gon' boost them. I can't work on winnings when I know you're losing, so I with the winnings and they throw the deuces. Guess I had to pivot, shooting the bazookas for the